Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's great to be here. Like always, our talks are prepared under the teachings of Spiritism. So if anyone joining us tonight is new to Spiritism, feel free to send in your questions, and myself or someone else will try to answer them. My name is Rudy, and our topic tonight is a time for everything. So with no further ado, let's elevate our thoughts, calm our minds, open our hearts. Let's connect with our Master Jesus and our mentors overseeing this work. And it is with much respect that I ask for their permission to start our talk tonight. Well, I would like to start our talk tonight with a reading from the book, The Way, the Truth, and the Life, psychographed by Francisco Cândido Xavier. And it was dictated by the Spirit Emmanuel. Let us shine our light. The anguish on our plane comes from darkness. Darkness has invaded every path in every direction. Darkness born from ignorance, wickedness, and foolishness, enveloping nations, institutions, and individuals. A fog that assails consciences, minds, and sentiments. In the midst of this long night, we need to kindle our light, otherwise it is impossible to find a way to freedom. Without the shining radiations from our own being, we cannot be seen very easily by the divine messengers who lend aid in the name of the Almighty, nor can we effectively help anyone, whomever that might be. It is indispensable to organize our inner sanctuary and illuminate it so that the darkness does not overcome us. I find this text filled with wisdom, and I think that it also aligns perfectly with the time that we are living now. Nowadays, too many of us out there, the world feels like it has been overtaken by dark forces and that they are roaming everywhere. Sometimes it may feel like there's no safe place, like nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. It feels like we are in a bad storm and there is absolutely no shelter in light. Now, if we stop and ask ourselves, is this really what we are living today? What do you guys think? And by the way, feel free to participate, okay? Type in your comments, send them in. If you have questions, send them in. The idea is to have an interactive meeting. So what do you guys think? So is this really what we are living today? Just dark forces, evil forces roaming the world? Or do you think that the chaos that we see all around nowadays, if there's something else at play that is putting everything else in motion? Any ideas? Well, this is exactly what we are going to be talking about tonight, right? So we're going to take a look at what's happening and see if we can find answers to many of the questions that we all might have. So going back to the text that we just read, what is this darkness that Emmanuel speaks about? Is it evil forces that are spreading pain and suffering throughout the world? What do you guys think? Don't forget to send your comments in. Well, personally, I understand this darkness to be ourselves. And I'm going to elaborate a little more on this, right? To me, it's the parts of ourselves that still need to be perfected, right? So it's the shadow figures that we try so desperately to hide from the world and sometimes even from ourselves, right? So they are what we don't like about ourselves. They are what we perceive we don't want the world to see about us. So they can be very powerful, these masks that we put on, right? To the point where they can dominate our every second. They can, and because we judge them to be bad, many times we show one person to the world, while in reality, right, we are someone completely different inside. And this causes an imbalance that prompts us to pull forward mechanisms of defense. And there are several mechanisms of defense that we employ. And in reality, they are employed by our ego, right? They are psychological strategies, so to say, that are unconsciously used to protect ourselves or to protect another person, right? From anxieties that rises from situations that are hard to deal with, like what we are going through right now, like this pandemic, or from unacceptable thoughts or feelings that we might have, right? According to Freud, there are 6 of these mechanisms that we put into play all the time, right? They are repression, where we try to repress something that happened to us or something that was traumatic that we don't want to deal with. So we shove it to the back of our minds. Well, the problem with that is that when you do this, that solution is temporary, right? There will come a day and a time where you will have to deal with this. The other mechanisms that we use sometimes is denial, where we are looking at a situation and we refuse to accept that that is exactly what is happening. And we are seeing this throughout the world from many leaders, right? Not accepting what is happening to their nations and being in denial about this pandemic and how serious it really is. We can also use projections where we get our personal feelings and we project into someone else or something else as if it was coming from them and not from us, making it their problems and not ours. There's displacement, where we try to substitute one of our actions for another. An example about displacement, we are at work and we have an argument with our boss. Well, truthfully, sometimes we feel like we want to punch our boss, but we know that we can't do that and it's also wrong. So we displace it. We don't do anything. And then when we get home, we kick our dog. So that's one example of displacement, right? There's also regression, there's sublimation. We can't really get into all of this. Otherwise, we were going to spend hours and hours and hours here. But it is important, though, to understand that our ego is not someone or something else beyond us, right? So the ego is our own self, and it is working consciously and also unconsciously. So it works as a mediator almost, kind of making sure that our internal self is in harmony with our external one. So in other words, it makes sure that our primitive and instinctual part, right, of the mind is in balance with our moral values or what the world perceives as acceptable. So when we have difficulties understanding ourselves or accepting who we really are, right, or what I really am, or what I'm going through, we tend to create a disconnect. So I created a disconnect between my primitive self and my moral self. And that overflows into the world as our vices and our imperfections. To give some examples, we would have greed and jealousy and drugs, sex addictions. Let me see, lack of compassion is another one. Nowadays, we're hearing a lot about suicidal thoughts, depression, and the list goes on and on and on. Now you might be asking yourself, well, but what does any of this have to do with what is happening in the world today, right? Well, in a certain way, everything, right? We saw that when we are in situations that are unpleasant, we tend to deploy mechanisms of defense, which can many times manifest themselves as vices and imperfections, right? Which in turn keep us from really seeing and accepting who we are. And that keeps us from working on the areas, right, that we really need to improve. And by only using these mechanisms, right, but never really addressing the issue that we actually have, we end up manifesting everything we see and we judge to be wrong in the world. So the social differences, the inequalities, anger, greed, crimes. So all of these things, they can be traced back to a refusal of getting to know oneself, right? Of recognizing our imperfections and willingly working on them. Uh, Many understand that there is something that needs to be changed, and consciously and voluntarily, which is very important, right? Work to improve it. I'm going to try to bridge this concepts, this psychological concepts now to spiritism, and try to merge the two of them, right? And hopefully that will help us understand where we find ourselves now and why everything seems so chaotic around us. Uh, we know by studying spiritism, right, that no one is created knowing anything. So, in fact, as the Book of Spirit tells us, we are all created simple and ignorant. And as we evolve through countless forms, experiences, lives, as reincarnations, right, we develop ourselves spiritually, consciously, and morally. Uh, in order to better understand this, we can look at our own lives, right, as an example. So let's trace back to the very beginning. We were born very dependent on others, right? And then as we grew and learned, we started to better understand the world around us, right? And based on our personal experiences, uh, we learned to make decisions. And sometimes from very early on, right, we start to use these mechanisms of defenses that we talked about to benefit ourselves, right? And many times in detriment of others. Now, as kids, right, some kids are better than others at telling the truth as an example or at recognizing their mistakes and also learning from them. Well, so the same also happens in school if we think about it, right? So when a kid goes to school, a few kids do their homework and they excel through their grades, while most need their parents constantly telling them what to do and even forcing them to learn. And then there are others that won't even respond, right, to that forceful way of teaching, and they simply flunk it all together. So when we look at this, and we can clearly see that some people easily advance to the next grade, some will follow along but barely making it, right? And others are completely left behind. And the ones that are left behind, they will have to endure the same lessons again until they are able to move forward. So there will be a place in time. So still talking about these kids in school, right? That they will all advance to a point where not only they will be changing their grades, so first, second, third, fourth grade, but they will also have to change the type of school they attend, right? So in this case, those who don't make that very last jump before you have to actually change schools, they will have to stay behind. So they will be forced to stay behind, and they will continue to attend the same type of school. So let's say somebody was in kindergarten, right? Somebody else was in junior high, and your group of friends is going to high school. You will stay behind because you haven't mastered what you need in order to move forward, right? And I promise you, this will all make sense in a little bit. So the same thing happens to us as we evolve as spirits. We learn, there's usually three main ways that we can learn, right? And as we are learning, we also transition from one order of spirit to another. Uh, there are several different types of lessons that we learn as we are gathering all this knowledge. So these lessons can be individually learned or they can be learned in groups, right? Which tend to be harder as we have to work together in order to make something happen or keep something from happening. Uh, and as we learn, we start to change. this grades as people, and as we learn as a spirits, right? We also graduate from one order to another. So, if we were to classify the spirits, we would see that there are three main orders. So, in the first order, right, we find pure spirits. So, matter as we perceive has no more influence over them. They they possess moral and intellectual superiority when compared to us. So once a spirit reaches this level, right, of consciousness, they start to work more closely with God. Jesus, as an example, right? He is an example of a pure spirit who is working closely with God, and he is personally responsible for our evolution. As we move forward, in this case, technically backwards to the second order of spirits, uh, we find good spirits. So they pay little attention to matter, right? They usually strive for excellence. Uh, good good prevails on them, right? So they are intrinsically good. They find joy in helping others. They find joy in learning. They understand God more intimately. This spirits, so the good spirits, right? They still benefit from incarnations because they still have trials to undergo in order to reach perfection, but they're not bound by matter as much as we are. And then in the third order, we find the imperfect spirits. So they're very materialistic with a propensity to wrongdoing. Uh, they are marked by ignorance, by pride, selfishness, and many times vile passions as well. So these spirits are the ones who benefit the most of reincarnating frequently, as they are still very attached to the material world and they have a lot to learn. We are currently part of this order of spirits. So we are part of the imperfect spirits order. But there is one small little caveat in here. We are getting ready to graduate into a different type of school now. So we're getting ready to make a jump, right? So as imperfect spirits, we can learn in the three possible ways we just saw, right? So we can learn by our self-will, which would be by love, right? We can learn by pain, and in a certain way, we are masters in learning by pain and also learning by suffering, right? And just as a reminder, there are lessons that we learn alone and lessons that we learn as a group. And currently, and as also mentioned before, right, the lessons that we learn as a group, they tend to be more difficult because there's a lot more involved. And we are right now going through a learning lesson as a group. Uh, but it's important to note that there is a higher purpose to what is happening in the world today. So many of us are seeing this pandemic as punishment, and many of us, I mean, you hear this all the time, people saying that this is God punishing us for what we have done. But one thing that we need to understand about God is that he doesn't punish, he teaches, right? So when we understand what is really happening in this moment throughout the world, we are able to better accept our current situation. So in the beginning of this, I had a lot of difficulties adjusting to our new normal, if you can call it that way. Um, I didn't think it was going to be as hard as it has been, actually. And it's really not the isolation, right, that got to me. Uh, I had forgotten to take into account that this was not my lesson only, right? There was something very different about this. There were other people involved in this. And I am aware and I know that my actions can play a part in the lives of others. But this time, it is a whole new ball game, right? And my actions could mean life or death to others. And at the same time, the actions of others could mean life or death for those I love and even for myself. So when I started to factor all those things in, I realized there was a whole lot more involved in this, right? And that life was going to change a lot. It's funny because for a moment, right, for a minute, it was as if I had forgotten all I have learned studying Spiritism. And I needed a crash course in how to survive the end of the world under the light of Spiritism. Now hold on. The world is not ending, right? But that sentence is catchy. I just had to use it. But anyways, guys, a few weeks ago, as I pondered about life and what it was going to be, how we were going to have to live from this moment on, my thoughts were racing. Right, there was a lot coming to my head, so I decided to write everything down. So everything that was coming into my head, I was writing down, and those words at the end, it became a text, and that text at the end became a video. And I'm going to share this video with you guys now, and then we're going to continue to talk a little bit. But this video that we are playing now, this was my kind of my wake up call. Here we go.
As I open my eyes, I want to believe that what we now live is nothing but a nightmare, and that the world still moves the way it did back somewhere. I want to believe thousands aren't sick, thousands haven't died, and thousands more will not come to pass. I wake up and I look for the busyness of cities, the honking of cars, and the chatter of people. I look for kids running around, living abound, and screaming out loud. But they're not there. All I do is sit and stare, trying to control my heart before I give into despair. My chest tightens and my breathing gets heavy with the suffering I see and hear through whispers everywhere. And I know that in the silence around, inside of walls, out in the hallways, above and below, the sick lay low. Sons and daughters cry in the loss of parents. Fathers and mothers weep within to keep their names all locked in. Sad eyes where light once stood, and grins on faces where smiles were seen. Now hiding behind their masks, keeping again their pains locked in and their sorrows within. Tick tock, says the clock, time's running out. Get out, get out. A voice screams out loud. Leave your hideout and look over there where men once stood with their hatred and anger, where battles were fought and thousands were lost. Look at the ground stained in red by the greed you had and all the bad you shared. Look at the sea covered in black, battered and beaten by all you took and all you've eaten. Look again and tell me what you see, if not deserts and smog disguised as fog, covering the ground, now missing their trees. So now tell me, why do you cry? If forever men go, all is doomed to die? You sit by a pool, clapping and cheering as whales play fool, not realizing in the dark of night they howl and cry, screaming to the moon, hoping it will all be over soon. Your city's blind, the sky. You teach your kids to lie. You look at the poor and you lock your door. But now you complain that I've given you a little pain? Now close your eyes and take a deep breath in. Tell me again, what do you see with men locked in and the world set free? See over there, where bombs were blown and blood was drawn? Death is no longer around, and new life is now found. Grass is coming in, flowers in bloom. You can see again the stars and the moon. Nature, you see, the way it should be. But before I go, there's one more thing you should know. I gave you the world filled with love, showed you the way, but taken by greed, you threw it away. I then gave you pain, but taking it in vain, you gave me disdain. So, to bring you back from your own wreck, I locked you away so that by suffering this way, I could help you see that this is not the way to be. As you mourn and squeal, nature has time to heal. It pains me to teach you this way, but for all the love I have for you, once this is all done and through, you will have the world anew. A new era is coming. Now open your eyes, look my way, let me wipe your tears away and welcome you to the dawn of a brand new day.
Okay, so the day that I wrote this poem, I was feeling very anxious. My thoughts were racing, and I had a lot of questions. Right, so all of a sudden I started having all of these thoughts, and I sometimes find that it helps me to put my thoughts into words. And as I read what I had just written, I realized that the answers I was looking for were right in front of me. Right, I just had to go inside to be able to see it. So what is happening now in the world is part of the process that we all know takes place in all worlds, right? As it moves from one class to another. So none of this was really unexpected. So not only people evolve and grow spiritually, morally, consciously, but worlds also evolve, right? And they have to evolve in order to give more evolved spirits a place more suitable to them. In the past decades, we have been experiencing a lot of changes, right? Uh, this moment seems especially hard and chaotic because not only we are getting ready to transition into a different class of spirits, but Earth is also getting ready to transition into a different type of world, right? So the two of us are transitioning at the same time. So we are at this point of convergence, right? So as a spirits, worlds also come in different orders, and they host the spirits that are suited to live in them. So a lower order spirit could not live in a higher order world in the same way that a first grade student would never be able to uh, take high school level classes. In chapter 3 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, Allan Kardec he mentions the different orders of worlds, and he kind of simplifies them. And it's important to understand that within these orders there are several different types of spirits living in this world, right? They all belong to the same order, but they are in different classes. So the first type of world are primitive worlds, right? They are not yet completely developed. Uh, the inhabitants in those worlds they act a lot more by instinct than by thinking, and life is a lot harder, right? And it consists basically of daily struggles to find food and shelter. So we can compare these worlds to the era of the caveman as an example. Following them, we have worlds of trials and expiation. So these worlds are highly advanced, right? When we compare them to the primitive world. So they're more industrialized, as an example. But however, even though they are advanced compared to the first type of world, the vices to which their inhabitants are inclined are a very um, a very hard truth about their great moral imperfections, right? These worlds are filled with hardships, pain, suffering, um, and usually these are the means that the inhabitants in these worlds will learn. They will learn to pain, through sufferings, through hardships. Earth is a world of trials and tribulations currently. Then, following worlds of trials and tribulations, we have worlds of regeneration. So, these worlds are a step up from the worlds of trials and expiation. They kind of work as a halfway house in order for us to better understand them, right? So, when a spirit has learned enough and is ready to move from a world of trial and expiation, right, into a more evolved world, right? It moves into a world of regeneration where they are still subject to the laws that govern matter. Their humanity still experiences the same sensations that we do, the same desires, but there's one major difference, right? They're free from all these muddled passions that many times will enslave us. Uh, they are no longer overtaken by pride or social inequalities, right? Envy, hatred. Um, so all of this is no longer part of them. So they don't have the need to make use of the same defense mechanisms that we do. They accept and experience God in a more intimate way, and they also strive to get closer to Him. So Earth is now getting ready to become a world of regeneration. So we have been a primitive world. We did a jump to a world of trials and expiations, and now we're getting ready to progress a little bit more into a world of regeneration. Next in the line, we have blissful worlds. So in a blissful world, spirits are no longer bound by heavy matter as we fight in the previous ones. They have already achieved a certain level of perfection, right? But they are not pure spirits yet, and they still benefit from reincarnating. But their lives are much longer than ours, right? And they view death differently. Death is not something to mourn. It is more like something to be happy about, like a rite of passage, as an example. And then, as a last type of world, we have the heavenly worlds, and these are the worlds that are inhabited by pure spirits, right? The ones that are no longer bound by matter, and they're also not conditioned to stain on their worlds at all times, right? They can venture out, go to different parts of the universe, and they do that while they are working on aiding God on the in the evolution of other human races, like Jesus, as an example, right? So he is a pure spirit that inhabits a heavenly world, but he also works in other things, other projects. Now, because spirits and worlds they both evolve, right? There is a constant exchange of spirit between worlds. So spirits migrating from one to another. But sometimes, though, in a certain point of their evolution, humans and the world that they inhabit are ready to do that jump together. And this is exactly what is happening on Earth right now. So we have reached this point of convergence, where most of us inhabiting Earth, right, will transition with Earth into a world of regeneration. And that's why we are seeing all kinds of disasters and calamities. And they feel like they're happening one after the other, right? And as we continue to transition, uh, we will start to notice that more and more of these events will start to happen. There is a book. It's called Posthumous Works, right? It was published in January of 1890. So it's the works of Allan Kardec that were put together as a book after he disincarnated. In this book, we find a psychographed letter where the spirits who dictated that letter, they are talking about the regeneration of humanity. And they tell us that this process has started, but they go on to say that it would intensify in the coming decades and even centuries. But they say in this letter that there would be signs that would be indicative that we were approaching the last phases of this transition. Um, and these signs they would be characterized by phenomena that would happen in global scales, right, and would affect much of the world. And we have been observing uh, all of these things, right? And it feels like they have been increasing. We had two world wars about 100 million people disincarnated in them, right? We had the flu pandemic. We had a big tsunami in 2004. We had the cyclone in Burma. I mean, there are so many examples, right? In 2010 in Haiti, we had the big earthquake. We have had several major volcanic eruptions. So we see that the world is overtaken by this. So this natural and unnatural disaster, they tend to cause mass disincarnation, right? But they also serve a much higher purpose. So as a world changes itself, the spirits in that world, they must change as well, right? Or they won't be able to make that jump. And they will be forced into another world of trials and tribulations in order to continue evolving. Uh, so going through a traumatic experience, sometimes it will help the spirit accelerate their evolution. So all spirits living through these traumatic experiences and these world disasters, they will have a chance to come back, and they will come back with a much higher desire to change, right? And get themselves ready to transition with Earth. Uh, so we can expect to see a lot more of these events, right, as we get closer and closer to becoming a new type of world. But it is also important to mention, guys, that this doesn't happen from night to day, right? And it can take decades, even centuries sometimes. So once this transition is complete, right? Once this process is done, those of us that are not able to transition with Earth, we will then go back. We won't be able to be here, is what I'm trying to say, and we are going to have to go to a different planet that is still a world of trials and tribulations, and it's probably one that is in beginning its stage, so it will be a lot harder for us. But speaking of these events, right? There are a lot of them that will continue to happen. But it's important to understand that not only these events will start to happen, but we are also in the process of receiving more advanced spirits that are coming to us, right, in order to aid us in this transition. So there are many of them who come every now and then, who carry out missions aimed at helping us. But their numbers have been increasing, and they have been reincarnated in large and larger numbers since the beginning of the 70s. And if we really stop and look around, we will see that this intensification of disasters is real, and there are more trials, right? But we also have to be able to see that there has been growth in science, technology, morality, spirituality, right? And it will continue to increase to the point where we will transition without even seeing a clear timeline. So it will happen in stages, right? The same way that it happened before. We have done this once before. So when Earth was a primitive world, ready to transition into a world of trials and expiation, one of our neighbors, Capella, was also transitioning, but from trials and expiation into a world of regeneration, right? And the spirits from Capella who were not able to evolve to the point to where they could inhabit a world of regeneration were sent to Earth. Now, which was a much more primitive world, right? And they were sent here in order to go through their trials and expiations again. But this time, not only they had their lessons to learn, right? They also came with a mission, right? They came with a job, and their job was to aid us and to get us ready for our next transition into a new world. And that time is now, right? So as we get ready to move into a world of regeneration, those of us who are not ready will be sent to another world of trials and expiations. And we will have not only to learn, but also to lead, like I said before. And we're going to have to do those things at the same time. So we will be working ourselves and kind of having a mission at the same time. But it's important to understand that nothing happens for no reason, right? And nothing is out of place. So the universe as a whole follows a divine order. So not only there is an order, there is also a time for everything, right? King Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 3, 1 to 8, right? I'm going to read to you guys. He says, there's a time for everything and a reason for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal. There's a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And it feels like that time is now, right? A time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear down and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And I know that many of us are lost and desperate right now, right? We feel like we are on this one-way road, um, all forced to go in the same direction, like without any choices. And it feels like we have been thrown into the unknown. But it is important, though, to understand um, that this moment serves a bigger picture, right? This moment serves a bigger picture opportunities. So, uh, if we were to ask ourselves what this moment is inviting us to do, what do you think our answer would be, right? What would your answer be? So, what should we be letting go of, right? And what should we be seeking right now? Don't be shy, guys. Go ahead and write your answers in. I would like to go over them. So, if I were to ask, I'm sorry, if I were to answer this question myself, right? So, personally, I believe this pandemic is teaching us that money, fame, power, social status, and that many other things that we judge as priorities, right? I think that this moment is teaching us that they're not as important as we thought they were, right? All of these things, they kind of lost their importance. And they lost their importance in face of something so small, right? Yet so powerful that it's bringing nations to their feet. I also believe that it's teaching us that our planet matters so much that if we keep abusing it, it will literally take us out. And maybe, right? And just maybe, it's inviting us to go deeper inside and focus on what matters most, right? Which is ourselves, our spirituality, a sense of community, right? Because even though we are isolated right now, right? This pandemic has forced us to think more about others and how much they actually mean to us. It's forcing us to spend times with our families, have dinners together, conversations. It's making it possible for us to really get to know one another, right? I have never spent so much time with my husband, and a lot of couples are saying, "Oh, we are fighting non-stop." That is not happening here. We are getting along wonderfully, but it's because this has been a blessing in disguise for us. It has given us the opportunity to feel like a family, to spend time together, to do little things together, to get to know one another a little bit better, right? This is also teaching us humility, right? Because we have to learn to depend on others. But it's also teaching us charity because we learn that it's not only about ourselves, others matter too. And they matter for the benefit of the whole, right? Let me see. It's also teaching us that we should always choose love, right, over anything else, because love will allow us to grow without the need to suffer. So we may look um, all around us, right, and find many reasons to worry and to cry. But if we were really able to see all that this crisis is teaching us, right, and be able to see the love, the mercy, and the wisdom of God through it all, like paving the way to a brand new world, I truly believe that our tears would give away to smiles, and our worries would turn to gratitude. Guys, it has been an immense pleasure spending this time with you. All of you, please stay in the light, love all, and help a few. If you have any questions, if there's anything you feel like asking, please send your questions in. It will be a pleasure to answer them. Much love to everyone. Stay in the light, guys. Love you all.